What is the defining characteristic of the Easter Bunny?
Chocolate.
Close. He's an eternal optimist. Now, I didn't read that anywhere. I actually made that up. So aren't you glad that I'm just your interim pastor and there is relief for you in the future? So this day that we've come together to celebrate has been called the most important day of celebration in the Christian calendar. It marks the culmination of the events of Holy Week. It's Easter Sunday. Why? Why? What's so special about it? Well, we all know that the answer to that question, don't we? This is the day that we have chosen to celebrate as the day when our Lord rose from the dead. And we greet each other as we've already done continuously with the words, "He is risen," to which there's the expected customary response, "He is risen indeed." And then we look at each other in that knowing way, as having spoken in code to someone who can only understand the significance of what has just been said because they're part of the club, part of the in crowd. It's an expression that can and does speak the foundational truth of our collective faith. Jesus Christ has conquered death. He's been there and come back. The proof of his deity lies therein, because only God himself has the power over life and death. Is that true? Is that how we understand that Jesus is God? Well, apparently not. Because we find the assertion of Christ's deity spilling from the lips of a pagan Roman centurion, just as he witnessed Jesus' blood and bodily fluids spill from the gash that his spear had made in his side. Now, the action was meant to reveal the reality of death, and the man was dead. The centurion had not witnessed a resurrection. Yet within minutes, he finds himself exclaiming with fear and trepidation that they had just killed the Son of God. Read the account in Mark Chapter 15, verse 39. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." So apparently the knowledge of Christ's deity is not dependent on his resurrection. Now, it is true that the other Gospels reveal these words of affirmation coming after certain unnatural phenomenon, blackened skies and quaking landmass. Yet, Peter was able to make the same assertion well before these events transpired. Reading from Matthew 16, verse 16, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." There are other examples, like the thief with whom Jesus was crucified, seemingly understanding that he was dying in the company of one who had the power over life and death itself. But I think that I've made one of my points this morning, and that is this. Now, in this age, just as in his lifetime, you get to recognize the deity of Christ by being in his presence. That is sufficient. You need not expect or require some kind of sign or wonder. The sheer magnitude of the revelation originates in God himself. We don't get to fully understand such things. They're revealed to us through divine dispensation. And even then, not fully. Because as Paul asserted, we see through a prism or darkened glass. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. Now we need to understand that our thoughts and our words are all we have. But they are not all there is. Jesus is more than what we make of him. He is risen. We speak those words as if we understood them. The magnitude of the sheer supernaturalness escapes us. So we resort to the knowing nod and the celebratory gesture. It's all we've got, and that's okay as long as we realize that it is nothing more than an assertion of our Christian belief system. There's a reality in those words that is far beyond our comprehension. And by the way, yes, I do realize that there are a number of books and arguments that attempt to rationalize the legitimacy of the claim of Christ's resurrection. And some have merit and some do not. Most rely on the assertion of the infallibility of the biblical narrative and understand that the world does not believe that. Of course it doesn't. The truth is that you can't authenticate a supernatural occurrence. By definition, its rationale lies outside of our temporal, worldly frame of reference. And although we like to think that folks outside of our circle will know what we're talking about, they actually don't. At least not in the same way that we do. I mean, they've read the Hallmark cards and they've watched a couple of movies, so they'll reference Jesus' death and resurrection, but they don't truly believe it. I started thinking about this sermon several weeks ago, looking for just the right biblical text that would help me illustrate how my current preaching journey has shaped my view of Christ's resurrection. You know how we've been focusing on the close circle where Jesus is host, and then the dotted circle where we are hosts in our families and in our close relationships. And then, of course, there's the larger culture where we are essentially guests, not really belonging, and where our beliefs and Christian worldviews don't really make much sense. So thus, the title of my sermon this morning. It's Easter Sunday. Why in the world does it matter? How do we talk about Christ's resurrection outside of our Christian context. Because at least there, folks are familiar with a phrase like, "He is risen." And we know how to respond. And it's meaningful. Of course it's meaningful. But to take that into the world, well, it's pretty hard, isn't it? How does one even begin to comprehend the ability to rise from the dead if you aren't in a place where his identity as God is revealed? Spoiler alert. I don't have an answer to that question, except to say again, now in this age, just as in his lifetime, you get to recognize the deity of Christ by being in his presence. When you go into the world as followers of Jesus Christ, you take his presence with you. But I do believe that there is a place where the world, that culture, can experience the presence of Jesus. And I think it is right where Easter can lead all of us. The realization of our own and our loved ones' mortality. To the place of suffering and death and grief. This is the place that is the common experience of all. Nobody gets out of here alive. This is why in the world matters. So there's a wonderful story written by Doris Stickney that can be used to explain the concept of death to young children. The story is called Water Bugs and Dragonflies. Maybe some of you have heard it. The gist of the story is that there's a colony of water bugs that live in a beautiful, quiet pond. They have a wonderful life, chasing one another near the bottom of the pond, far away from the blinding sun. However, sometimes a strange thing happens. Sometimes their friends climb up the lily stalk and just disappear. The water bugs can't understand this at all. Then one of the water bugs suggests that the next bug who goes up the stalk should come back down and tell the others what's happening up there. What are they seeing up above? And why take that journey in the first place? So all the bugs agree that the next one has to come back and report what's going on. Well, one spring day, the water bug who came up with the idea to report back feels a strong urge to climb up the lily stalk. He can't understand this urge, and he can't even seem to control himself. He must climb up and up toward the light. He breaks the surface of the peaceful pond, and he finds himself in a broad, beautiful lily pad. And he sleeps peacefully. And he wakes up, and he looks down at his body, and a dramatic change has happened. What was once his stubby body now has 4 silver wings and a long tail. He's become a beautiful dragonfly. Swooping up into the air and flying back down among the flowers, he feels happy and free, exploring this new world. And then he stops to rest, and he remembers his promise to the water bugs. He wants so badly to tell them what adventures lie in store for them, adventures that will be wonderful and need not cause any fear. But as he attempts to dive back down into their watery home, the dragonfly discovers that he can't get back. He hits the surface of the water and bounces up into the air. And the dragonfly realizes that he looks so different that his friends wouldn't recognize him anyway. And they must wait and see what futures lie in store for them. So the dragonfly wings off happily into his new home of air and sunlight. Dragonflies and butterflies are symbols of resurrection. When the earliest followers of Jesus laid him in the tomb on that first day, they were not expecting transformation. They were not expecting that he would emerge from that tomb as the risen Christ. Even though Jesus foretold his crucifixion and resurrection multiple times in the Gospels, the miracle was still an unexpected occurrence, phenomenon for his first followers. Now, the Gospels differ a bit in describing the events of that first Easter. Our reading this morning focuses on the women who came to the tomb very early in the morning on the first day of the week, Sunday. Luke makes sure to name some of the women: Mary Magdalene, Johanna, and Mary, the mother of James. The women bring fragrant spices and perfumed oils because they had witnessed how Jesus' body had been stored in the tomb, but not properly washed and anointed. So they prepare to bury Jesus honorably after the Sabbath. Now let's imagine for a moment how we would feel if we were in their shoes. We probably would have, emotionally prepared ourselves for the difficult task ahead. We would have organized the spices and the oils on Friday, right after Jesus took his last breath on the cross. We would have decided on the place to meet early on Sunday morning. And then we would have rested on the Sabbath, as was our custom, letting the grief wash over us, allowing the tears to flow, facing the future without a person who meant the world to us, feeling numb or angry, sad, or maybe just lost, wondering how we could possibly go on with life as usual. These are feelings, for instance, that are fresh to Carol and I this morning, having experienced what we have gone through in our respective families over the past several weeks. Isn't that often the way of grief? Wanting to do something to keep occupied, to not have to fully face the emptiness that we feel inside of us, wanting to honor those that we love to the best of our ability. Though the stone is rolled away, in this case, there is no body inside that tomb. And when the women looked around, they probably began asking questions. And then they noticed that there were two men who were standing beside them in gleaming, bright clothing. These appear to be angels, and the women are frightened, and who wouldn't be frightened? Jesus' body isn't anywhere to be found. And a couple of angels appear out of nowhere wearing blinding bright clothing. And then comes that piercing question, the one that captured my attention as I searched the scriptures in preparation for this message this morning. It's an even more important question than the one that I used in my sermon title. Let's read beginning at verse 5. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the man said to them, Why do you look for the living among the dead? Whoa! What kind of question is that? Why do you look for the living among the dead? Before they can even formulate an answer, the angels say, "He isn't here, but has been raised." Remember what he told you when he was still in Galilee? That the human one must be handed over to sinners to be crucified and then on the third day rise again. The women, to their credit, remember the words that the angel referenced, the words that Jesus spoke to them when he was still in Galilee. The women remember the past and have faith in the present. They eventually return from the tomb and they tell the 11 disciples everything that they had just seen and heard. And surprise, surprise, the disciples don't believe them. Luke writes, their words struck the apostles as nonsense. And they didn't believe the women. 24, verses 9 and 11. Well, so much for trusting one another, eh? Looks like it isn't just the world that can't believe our story. So much for his disciples, remembering that Jesus told them multiple times that he was going to be crucified and rise on the third day. Even Peter runs to the tomb. He bends down, he looks inside, sees the linen cloth, and returns home, wondering what just happened. The risen Christ will appear to some of his followers on the road to Emmaus and will later appear to his disciples. But Luke's Easter story this morning doesn't include a resurrection appearance from Jesus himself, does it? It's a story about believing in our hearts even when we may not yet see any evidence before us. It's a story about honoring the supernaturalness of it all. Luke's story this morning is also about believing people when they share something with us in their vulnerability, in their trembling, in their quaking, and in their fear. They blurt out a truth that should ring and resonate in our very core. It's a story about not looking for the living among the dead. Now, I am only able to preach the message that God gives me, even though I might like to preach a different one. And this morning, I must preach the one that speaks to my own recent experience of two particular funerals. One in the company of those who do not share the same faith that we have. The other in the company of those that have placed their trust in this risen Savior of whom Luke speaks. The one looking for the dead where they expect them to be, among the dead. Sometimes in our lives we cling to the past with all of our might. We find ourselves positioned in the Good Friday world, not recognizing that Easter has dawned. Because even if that is a world of sadness and grief, it is at least the one that is expected. It's the one we can contextualize. It's baggage that we understand because we've packed those bags ourselves. But the angels turn the women's and the apostles' worlds upside down. And it turns our world upside down as well. Why? Why do you look for the living among the dead? The answer to that question can be as obvious as the dragonfly who can't get back down to the mud on the bottom of the pond, not after wings have sprouted and transformation has occurred. But the realization comes only after the dragonfly has discovered that he is free to fly in the sunlight. As poet Tyler Knott Gregson reminds us, I know you've got feathers, though you may have forgotten them, hidden away because so many others won't leave the ground. Don't you dare hide your wings, because someone else is afraid to fly. The second funeral that I experienced was a celebration of life in the company of people who have chosen to fly, held for one whom you would not find among the dead. No, you will find him more alive than when he walked the earth, like the dragonfly, having become far more alive than he ever imagined. And even when with us, this person was far more fully alive than the world could ever understand. As the Apostle Paul reminds us, we have been set free from the enslaving bonds of the past, and we have new life, new living in Christ himself. I read to you Romans chapter 6, verses 5 to 9. Since we have been united with him in his death, we will also be raised to life as he was. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We are no longer slaves to sin, for when we died with Christ, we were set free from the power of sin. And since we died with Christ, we know we will also live with him. We are sure of this because Christ was raised from the dead, and he will never die again. Death no longer has any power over him, nor over those who believe. New life is on the horizon, and my friends, this is the meaning of Easter. We must be among the living, set free to live powerfully in every present moment, set free to love God, love our neighbors, and love ourselves, set free to work with God in restoring his creation to himself. Jesus said that he has come so that we might have life abundant. And how do we know that we are among the living? You know that you're among the living when you're among the loving. Jesus said, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." John 13. The Easter message informs us that life is found among the living. Our text asks us, why do you look for the living among the dead? It's the question a dead world desperately needs to hear, even if they don't know it. It's Easter Sunday. He is alive. And that is why in the world it matters.